The entire contents of this podcast and website are based upon the opinions of Tammy Garcia and her guests, unless otherwise noted. The information on this podcast is not intended to replace a one-on-one relationship with a qualified healthcare professional and is not intended as medical advice. It is intended as a sharing of knowledge and information from the research and experience of Tammy Garcia and her guests. This is the Naturally Inspired Podcast, coming to you from our 1890 homestead in Johnstown, Colorado. I'm Tammy, and I want to thank you for joining us. Let's get started and help people feel good so they can do what they love for longer. Thank you for listening. This is part 2 with Asia from Letters to the People. Please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with a friend. It helps us spread our very important message.
And there are programs, there's suicidal programming that is put into place, and there's also reporting programming that is put into place. And so one of the first lines of defense is the minute you start remembering or recalling, feel like you got to talk to somebody, the only person you trust really is actually your handler. And so you will call and start talking to your handler most likely. And that way they know, oh, okay, so we need to recondition this person. And they, very lovingly
try to get you to come home.
Put them right back into it. Yeah. And so the way my experience went was she gave me this phone number and I'm all kinds of scared now because I'm like, there's conditioning from my family. There's conditioning from my culture. And I think God is probably going to strike me down too. I'm just like, whatever levels. So I was going crazy. I couldn't deal with it anymore. So what I did is I had that paper in my hand, and I'm looking at this paper. I'm going to call this therapist. And I dialed my dad's phone number. I called my dad and I'm like, hey, Dad, I'm going through kind of a tough thing right now. I mean, this was like my voice. Can we go to lunch? And his response was, yeah, sure. Your mom and I are just getting on the cruise ship. We'll be gone for about 10 days. But when I get back, let's go to lunch. And I'm like, okay, thank you. And I hung up the phone. And I'm like, I can't wait 10 days. So I was at a serious crossroads.
Right.
Like this was divine intervention, 100% divine intervention, because the programming is really in place. Mm-hmm. Like if my dad dies, I don't know what I'd do. I'd kill him kind of. This is what it is, but it was programming. So he's the only guy on the planet that I trusted. He's the one I'm going to call. So instead I called the therapist and I'm like, hey, do you have any openings? And he said, yes, I do. And so I went and saw this therapist. I made an appointment and I filled out the paperwork like super fast. And he's like, yeah, I think I could work with you. And I'm like, well, how long is it going to take? And he says, well, let's give it a couple months and see where that goes. And what I heard was, let's give it a couple months and you'll be cured. And I'm like, awesome.
Right.
I can do that one. I don't have to tell anybody. I think I've got enough money in my savings account. I don't even need to tell my husband, right? I just like mortified that anybody would think I was in therapy. And that went almost 9 years. Actually that therapy ended up going 9 years. Because at the minute I went in, my body, my mind, everything was just ready to say, this is really what's driving all of this. And I was tenacious enough that I'm like, I'll give this space. I'm going to see what this is. And it just kept getting more and more. It was not anything that my therapist prompted me to remember, because he'd done this enough where he realized he didn't know the story. And he would say it. He goes, I don't know your story. And I would be so angry at him. I'm like, you're the therapist. Of course you know the stories. Tell me what I'm supposed to be seeing. Is that right? I saw this. I remembered this person. Is that right? And he would just say, you'll learn more. Just ask and you'll learn more. And I was like ridiculously frustrated with that answer.
Right.
But what that did was allowed me to go, oh, wow, I'm really the only source here.
Mhm.
And as I was seeing what the conditioning was, I saw how dangerous it was for me to have any contact with my family because I'm like, shoot, I don't even know my trigger words.
Change your perception or your memories,
Absolutely. Yeah. And
or question yourself as well,
all the way.
right?
So I saw, and I actually proposed it to him. I saw that it would be extremely important for me to have a distance. And he said, well, I would agree with you on distancing yourself from your family. You may even consider um, not talking to them for a while. Like he just kind of was like, here's some
Mhm.
options. I
Mhm.
think
How do
that's
you
the way
feel
that
about
went.
it? Like
How do you
bouncing
feel
it off
about
you?
that?
Mhm.
And every part of me was like, holy cow, I don't know. I know that they use tones. My dad could call me, he could say a trigger word. And then all of a sudden I've shifted into a different personality. And what is this? I mean, and I was so focused on, I got to get this stuff out of me because it's eating me alive inside. Again, going back to, these emotions that are trapped inside our bodies and
Yeah.
issues that were going on, that kind of thing. And I was like, this depression thing, that's not me. I feel like I'm split all the time. This is driving me crazy. I'm not being a very good mother. Like there was a lot of motive here
Right.
where
Did you know
I went
about
into that.
repressed memories before?
No, gosh, no. I
Yeah.
had no idea. I hadn't even heard of satanic ritual abuse, which was really interesting. The therapist that my friend recommended I see was a specialist in satanic ritual abuse. And it was ironic because he only took recommendations by people he knew, prior clients, that kind of thing. And so she had done some work with him. And some of the behaviors I was eliciting,
Mhm.
definitely, some of the things I'd say, whatever, there's a pattern. I mean, I can see it in people too, where I'm going, ooh,
Something's happened
there's
there.
going to be some rooting in that.
Yeah.
Like I would lean towards that. I go, yeah. And it's not just because I wanted to put it there. It's like, oh no, I see markers. And I think that's what she saw too. So it turned out he's a specialist in this. Didn't ever say it until I start coming up with ceremonies of being baptized in blood and being blessed with, like people chanting in black and red robes around me. And I'm like, candles, weird stuff.
Right.
Right.
Did you have this the first when you had your first, session with him and you agreed to hypnotherapy? A lot of
Hmm.
people think hypnotherapy is like something that somebody else puts you in,
Yeah. Right.
right? Can you
Right.
describe that? So we're clear on
Hypnotherapy
that?
is, yeah, there's a certification that he went through. He was a psychotherapist, and so he was an LCSW, plus then he went back and got a doctorate in, I think it was in psychology, and so he had all the letters, right?
Right.
And I think at the time hypnotherapy, when he decided to get trained in it, he just felt like it would be another modality that he could help
Yeah,
his patients with,
exactly.
and so began using it. And so what hypnotherapy really is it's the same state that you get into when you're in a deep meditation. It's basically getting into a theta brainwave, and you're in you're in complete control, which is so funny because I was kind of like, well, what is this? But basically what he said is, the way I do this is I'm going to count some numbers. I'm going from 10 to 1, and I'm going to suggest that you go deeper into learning from yourself the stories you want to show yourself to help you like basically find out where this depression's coming from. And I'm like, well, sounds good to me. And so then what happens is everybody has repressed memories. Like everybody has them. And, you know, trauma usually puts them there. There's stuff, there are things that you don't really want to know, or it is so overwhelming that you have to put those memories away. I mean, even something as simple as a car accident.
Yeah.
You're right involved with it, and there are sections of that car accident you've got no memory of. You've repressed it for
Right.
whatever reason. It it's definitely. I mean, the body keeps the score. If people really want to understand how the mind works, I highly suggest that they either read that book or listen to that book. I was so validated through the way the brain works and why I did what I did and why I react the way I react. I mean, it's a science. Your body, your brain does certain things, and the people that are conditioning all of their victims also get this science. They know it. They've been practicing it, so
Right.
they know to do this. Thus the candy. Sugar also helps subdue that. So after a ceremony, after witnessing a bloodbath, I mean, and it got to be that way sometimes, or just a simple rape, if you want to call it that. There's always the sexual trauma is always there, because that act and that violation is driving the trauma and the experience further in. Again, we're talking, energetics. It's driving it into the body. So you're going to be male or female, doesn't matter. There is going to be some kind of sexual trauma based on the energetics there. And then afterwards, you're either rescued. I can't even tell you how many times my dad rescued me, and I'm like, oh, thank God. And here he is, kind of like, the Superman that's arrives on the scene. And, somewhere in my brain, I'm not like, what the hell are you doing here? It's like, oh, thank God you're here, totally different. And then there's always something given, like a candy, because the sugar settles that system. Sugar is also a drug, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the sugars get involved and the chemical reactions involved, and there could very well be another drugging here. We're going to, now you're going to go to sleep and you're going to wake up in your bed and you're usually cleaned up. I mean, there's always, if I was raped, if there was blood drawn on my body, or if I was whatever, I mean, I'm getting cleaned up by usually the women that were present in the ceremony. They're going to clean you up, and you wake up. I was like kind of coming to, and here's my dad, and he's driving me home, and it's like, hey, didn't you enjoy that merry-go-round ride? And it's like, were we at a part? I guess we were. You just so disoriented, and you get told what was just, like what your experience. Just, oh, you must have fallen asleep. You must have really enjoyed that. It's like, I really enjoyed something. Did I? Like the disorientation is so real. But back to the repressed memories, everybody has that, and so when you go into when you actually utilize hypnotherapy and you go into a state, it's not that you're being hypnotized. What you're doing is just going into a very relaxed theta brainwave. And this is where imagination happens. This is where creativity is spawned, really some beautiful things. And that's when people can go, well, so then you imagined it. And it's like, but that was not the intent. Here is where the wild card gets to come in again. You, as a person that has an intent of healing, now your body's like perking up, going, ooh, I like this idea.
I have a window here.
I'm going to take advantage of it. And your emotions are like, we know how to lead out on this one. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I was just sobbing and sobbing. And I'm like, I don't have any memories. I don't know what's going on, but oh my gosh, this is really coming forward. Wow. And then that was kind of the opening. And then my body would shake, or then I would feel this pinch, or, then the body memories could come through. And then I would start to see something, and it could start out with a color, or it could start out with, there's a teddy bear, there, something there, but it would get my attention. Mm-hmm. And I learned very quickly, okay, tell me more about this teddy bear, or tell me more about the color blue, or tell me more. And all that does is it just kind of opens up. And then me, and I don't know that everybody is like this, but for some reason, I was definitely able to drop into memories fairly easily. And, during a lot of the torture, you separate from your body, you dissociate. And so some of the memory would be from above it, and I was watching what was happening to me. And some of it was actually, I'm right in it, and I'm feeling the electric shock, or I'm feeling the needle going into my neck or my arm or wherever it was they were putting it. And sometimes I was completely out, but I was able to start grasping portions of it and just ask myself questions, learn more about this, learn more about this. And that was the prompt that my therapist always said, learn more about, and he would repeat what I just said, because that's all the information he had to go with. Right. Learn more about the color blue, learn more about the teddy bear, learn more about the pain in your arm, learn more about the smell that you just had, and so that permission to learn more was always met by, oh, here's more. Oh, here's more. And pretty soon the whole storyline started opening up for me. And I was like, I'm just watching a movie here, and wow. And then emotion would come in. And so it was a really thorough experience that I had. And I was also able to, the way I processed was, I was experiencing or re-experiencing, and I'm a big fan of this because of how visceral it is. And then it was being recorded, so then I take the tape recorder, or I take the tape home, and days before digital stuff, but I would take the tape home and I would listen to it. So now I'm witnessing myself, which is cathartic in and of itself, right? And there were times that I would journal about it too. So I would have these different levels of witnessing, and the healing that came from that really, it accelerated my healing. And so being where I am right now as a survivor, I can hold space for other survivors in their healing process,
Mhm.
and not find that I get triggered the way they're being triggered. And this has been kind of a it's a double-edged sword, because I have had more people, not that I've been really super prolific with telling my story, which I haven't been, but when I have been confident enough to say it, I have had more people go, "How can you tell me what you just told me and not be like rocking in a corner? How can you tell me what you just told me and not be sobbing?" And it's not that I've dissociated from any of it. I have released it and
Right.
integrated those separated parts, because I'm going to go back to what I was saying. The motive here is power, and the way they get power is by isolation and separation. So if they can separate you from your mind, you from your God, you from your community, if they can set us against each other, if there's always the us and the us and them is going on in here too,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
you've got these multiple personalities, and you don't want to go inside, and you don't want to ask yourself questions because I don't know if I want to see that, you are keeping yourself in a state of isolation. And that is exactly where they want you to be. And that is exactly the best way for us to be controlled.
Right.
Independent thought, creative thought doesn't get an opportunity to really flourish if you're fragmented. My goal
Right.
was to integrate all of the personalities that I had. And I would say that I've done a pretty damn good job of doing that. So then that way, as that integration, I can actually look at something and go, I can hold space for you here. I can acknowledge you here. I can have compassion for this entire situation, from looking at the sickness of the perpetrator to the horror of the victim, and understand there is a really there's a dynamic going on there that is actually a separation. They're both reflecting fractions, fragments, and isolation of their own on each other in that room. And there are energies that thrive off of that, that just thrive off of that terror, that thrive off of that
Right.
fear, and thrive off of even the rooting of the power.
Mhm.
Those who are actually, acting as the power players. Nobody's in that position. Well, I can't say nobody. I don't want to be that absolute, but very few are in that position that were not perpetrated upon first and
Right.
split first.
Right.
And somewhere in there, they make a choice. Like, that's been my biggest mystery, is how did my dad, the hell happened to that guy to choose in to do what he
Mhm.
chose? Because I didn't choose that. I never acted out on my children. I raged on them. And through the therapy, it just went away. Like, I didn't go in and say, okay, we've got to address my anger. We've got to
Right.
address this rage.
Right.
Just the process of pulling up memories and really just being my own witness and releasing that. There was this day that my oldest son came to me. He's like, God, you haven't yelled at us for a long time now. It's been like a few months. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, you're right. And so I sat there and I'm like, ooh, is this a real deal? Like, this could be really cool, but is this really happening?
Right.
And the answer is yes, it did. And oh my gosh, how many years ago was that? I mean, it's been 15 years ago, they easily. And that he said, you don't yell at us like you used to. And I'm like, it's not there. I
Right.
can look at a situation that used to just really trigger me and not be triggered, not yell, not, I mean, just kind of start asking questions like, not too sure I understand what your thought process was there. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And that ability that I have was also really refined by being my own therapy,
Right.
like being the witness to my own story, not having my therapist guide it. And because of my experience, what I know is there is a huge, huge population of people that have been impacted by
That's what I was going
satanic
to
ritual
ask you
abuse.
next. I was going
Yeah,
to ask you next, like, how big is this survivor community?
it's
Because
massive.
talking about, well, I know human trafficking is like $150 billion business.
Mm,
And that's, when you start thinking about breaking down how many lives that must have or must affect,
mhm.
how big is this community of
It's huge.
survivors?
It's huge because it's connected. When I talk about tunnel systems that go through the entire United States, I'm not talking about Europe and all the old what's
Right.
there.
The Vatican or anything.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
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 No, I'm
Yeah.
talking about just my own experience and knowing how well connected they are. Like whenever I moved, we moved quite a bit in my birth family, and everywhere we went, there
Was
was a
that
connection.
strategic?
It was,
Moving?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It was definitely where my dad, what he was trying to do in moving up in the organization. There was definitely strategies. Some families don't have those goals, or they're conditioned to be minions.
Mhm.
So it's good to have them just kind of stay and be afraid to move, or just kind of satisfied in their jobs, or whatever their personality. The hard thing is like you're tracked since it's so familial and so social. uh, if you put kids in a room, like go to a kindergarten class and throw out the toys and that kind of thing, it is so easy to track kids. You can see who kind of gets volatile fast, who the shy ones are, who the
Yeah,
little leaders are, who the artistic ones are, who likes to grab the crayons. Like you get to see their personalities. People show you who they are,
they
even as
do.
adults. They will,
Mhm.
I'm sure you've interviewed people or even interacted with people where, whether we think we're doing it or not, we are really good at showing people who we are.
Mhm.
And if you're observant and not reactive, you can start picking up on that cognitively. Like subconsciously, we get it. We already see it. It's like, oh yeah, I see what's going on here. I see who you are, and then we kind of like downplay it. Oh no, they're not really like that. It's a
Right, or we let
personality.
somebody else affect our opinion.
Oh my gosh. Oh yeah. It's like, what am I pulling to myself? Like that's part of my self evaluation all the time. I'm looking around at like who's in my space. Like, am I in conflict a lot with this individual? What is that showing me? What am I asking? What am I agreeing to?
Mhm.
Um, are they somebody that I really admire? What is that showing me? What am I, like that whole thing? It sounds arduous, but it's not. It is what we end up doing, and what I would love to encourage everybody is to be their own archaeologist. You just actually go into an archaeological dig of who you are, and it's
Yeah,
fascinating and it's scary. But the repressed memories are part of this. You can't, I would say that you can't really know yourself without a few recovering a few repressed memories. I mean, there's other modalities
mhm.
that you don't have to, like you can get rid of that energy, and it, even generationally, and that is a thing. You can do that. But if you are one of those people that I just don't want to know. I just don't want to see. I just,
Right.
the hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil conditioning.
Mhm.
I would say that you will find that you're going to hit a ceiling of yourself at some point, and then you get to be in choice on if you want to push past that ceiling by going inside,
Right.
or if you're just going to be satisfied with where you are and just kind of reactive. And I'm not judging anybody. I'm my decision to be extremely thorough with myself ended up in 9 years of hypnotherapy, repressed memory recovery, and some really messy results. Like it was messy during that whole time. It wasn't like, oh, look, I'm so great. Like this is a
Right.
great champion. Oh, the stuff I started pulling
Up,
in.
down,
Oh
up,
my
down,
gosh.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a messy time. And I can tell you the person that I self-actualized in and integrated into was not the person that I was when I began that process. And so that affected my family, that affected
Right.
my marriage, that affected my siblings. That I stopped talking to everybody in my, like I dropped off the planet. My aunts and uncles wondered what happened. My dad knew, and that's why he started sending people in, and then he started writing letters to church leadership, and they were pulling me into the bishop's office. And it's, I get the stern, thing. And if that didn't work, then I get another letter that was written to me or from me. And they're like, we need to understand what's going on, because we've been asked to take away your temple recommend. So, I mean, they're juxtapositioning themselves to threaten things that were supposedly really dear to me, like my temple recommend. Like, now I can't progress and be a god if I can't go to the temple. And in that dynamic, had I not been actually working with a professional, that would have been terrifying.
Right.
You
Because now
know?
you're out on your own.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. But this case, I'm like, I'm working with a professional, and I know who's writing those letters. And obviously, if you're in agreement to this, you're probably part of the brotherhood. So I know who I'm talking to. I mean, it was it got easier for me to track it.
Mm-hmm.
So, the hard thing, truly, going back to the fact that it's so prolific, that the population of people that are impacted by satanic ritual abuse, mind control, cult programming, human experimentation, government influence, that kind of thing. It is massive. It's massive. And a big part of that population has effectively buried those memories. And then I'm going to have people kind of like stand up and put their hands on their hips and they say, prove it. And I'm going to say, well, if you're courageous enough to step into that and prove it to yourself, and give yourself some time where you're working with a professional hypnotherapist, or maybe not a professional, maybe you actually go with somebody that doesn't have to have all the letters behind their name, maybe you can start seeing the way this process works, and then we can have a discussion. Because what people want, they ask me a lot of times, what are you after? Are you after justice? How are you going to get that? How is this even existing? And it's not just religion. It's infiltrated the police forces. It's infiltrated the government systems. People that are running. I mean, Utah's a theocracy, so it's pretty saturated here. And good people are just me like, well, no, my boss is a good guy, and it's like, yeah, to you,
Right.
because there's a certain persona that is super effective for him to maintain this personality. Even your kid's school bus driver. I mean, like, daytime school bus driver, nighttime satanic ritual abuser. You know what?
Right.
And it is everywhere. And then there's the ones that are impacted and they don't have it in their families. And I'm saying, like, what if your postal worker is actively involved? What if the guy that runs the grocery store was a victim, and he has these meltdowns, and the employees are affected by these meltdowns that just kind of come out of nowhere? I mean, we all know people like this.
Right.
So the population that was directly affected by it it's massive. What I'm concerned about is when that population begins to, you'll start remembering. I mean, you'll have flashbacks. I had flashbacks. I had memories. I had dreams. I had no way to connect them until I realized what I was connecting, because your body just wants to get rid of this garbage. And so does your mind. But once this population starts to become a little braver, and they start to speak out, and this is where my podcast actually kind of is the whole reason I want to have a platform for these voices.
Right.
They still need help, but the professional community, they who would be willing to help and want to help, the social workers, the psychotherapists, the whatever, I would highly encourage people to interview them, because there's two things that happen in my experience. Like, if I would have been successful in talking to my dad would have immediately known what his next step was. And if I was really having a meltdown, then he'd say, you know what, there's a therapist that I could really, right? So now I'm in their system, and I'm either given a drug to suppress, or I'm going through ceremonies and I'm getting reconditioned, and for whatever it would have been.
Right.
So there's plenty of therapists that are actually a part of
The system.
the system. And there's therapists that are not actively perpetrating in the system, but they were victims. Because that's why, like I had this thing and I just feel like I want to help people and I'm going to go get my degree and I'm going to be this therapist. And then I show up and I'm like, I want some hypnotherapy, or I've been having these dreams. Let me tell you about my dreams. And it triggers them. You're going to hit their ceiling and they're going to divert you because it's too much for them. So they're going to go, are you really sure or are you sure you haven't watched this scary movie? Or I don't know that it's somewhere in their notes they're going to put down, I don't know that I believe this. This is way too big.
Right.
And what's honestly going on is they have hit their own ceiling. They've hit their own limit. And unless they are actually actively working on themselves, having their own therapist, or willing to look at what is their deep darks, what they've repressed, you're going to find people, you're going to find practitioners that you're going to trigger as somebody that wants to heal. And you need to be given permission to, if you interview somebody and you say, ooh, I want to work with this person, I like your modality, to maybe have another modality. So rapid eye therapy, or you're doing Reiki or cranial sacral, some of the alternatives, your chiropractor, he's doing muscle testing, things like that. If you could have a couple of them going on, it's more expensive. A lot of times you're very dysfunctional as a victim. So, that's prohibitive too. But you do need to have the permission to be able to say, obviously, we have hit a ceiling because you're starting to marginalize what I know is coming forward from me. And I'm just as confused as perhaps you are, but we need to part ways. I think we've hit this ceiling and I need to get a recommendation for somebody else, or we need to move on. Thank you for your help. And as a victim that is looking for outside authority, that is a hard sentence.
Yes.
You don't think that way. You're just like, oh, well, I guess I'm wrong.
Yeah. Because there's got to be some comfort in thinking, well, maybe I am just imagining this. Maybe this didn't happen.
You know what? Yes. Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice?
Sometimes I feel that way now. Right now with the state of affairs, I'm like, sometimes I just wish I didn't know what I know.
Right. Yeah. That's so sad. This would be better to push somewhere else, right?
But I think our souls and the light in us is just it's like you had said earlier, like our body, it wants to be in homeostasis. It wants to regulate. It wants to get to this point of peace. And I think that's what that is. Your
Absolutely.
Truth is peace, even though it's disruptive.
Disruptive is a good word.
Yeah. That's understated, obviously, but truth is peace, because you can't build anything off a lie.
Yeah, it will cage you. And then you have to decide if you're comfortable in that cage. And I think because we are multidimensional beings, if you just even want to consider mind, body, spirit, emotion as the multidimensions, all of those want to be balanced and in homeostasis with itself. Like we are a container for all of that. And we want the whole thing to kind of be flowing and, like really just kind of in a homeostasis. And when it's not, we can ignore it, or there's something there. Like there's a number of different things we can do. But I agree with you, and I also agree because in my memories, there were a number of times that I actually witnessed things that were of the occult and of the divine. And there are times that I would come out of those and I'm like, that was not a typical experience for me. I don't often see or talk to angels. I don't often see or witness what I would consider a demonic possession, but those energies are still there. So the way I can speak to it even has labels and things like that, but I cannot deny that there was divine help witnessing and in that room, when
With
certain
you.
things are happening. And sometimes there was an intervention, to be completely honest. I'm alive because of a couple of interventions. I've been brought back to life because of a couple of interventions. My body was dead. And that was the goal. That was actually the goal of the situation. And then the total disregard that darkness has for humans. It was just so blatant all the time. Like, it blows your mind. And then here's the other thing: as a good person, right? As a, I don't know if you want to use the word moral or whatever, but as a good person, we cannot fathom where this motivation comes from,
Yes. Yes.
nor should we. Like, just because you don't get it does not mean it gets disregarded. So this is, I love to help people see this through a particular illustration. So we've all seen the good guy, bad guy, thriller movie, right? So bad guy has hostage, has gun. You've got the bag of money, right? Has gun, whatever. There's this standoff. Okay. So bad guy with hostage knows you want human because human is valuable to you, right? Money, meh, whatever. I'm going to trade for this human life. They already know this. They've written, it's their playbook. That's what we don't get. We're actually in their playbook. So there's this standoff in the movies, and bad guy says, "Throw me the money, I'll give you the child, the hostage."
Right.
Now, here's where we as the audience go, "Okay, yeah, how do we like maneuver this?" And they're going to shoot them or they're going to do the thing.
Mm-hmm. And we're
Because
already
these good
rooting for
people,
someone.
we're already in there, because here's the assumption that is always made. That individual with the bag of money and the audience, we're all assuming, there's this huge assumption being made that bad guy has the same value system and thinks the way we do. That's where our downfall is. That they don't think the same. That thought process is not theirs. Their value for life, their value for anything, our brain, we don't have the comprehension for, especially in a high stress situation. We are banking on the fact that any shred of morality or goodness in that guy that's got the hostage
Mm-hmm.
will somehow rise up, and we're going to have an exchange, even if we're going to shoot at each other, or maybe I get away with whatever. Oh, thank God. That is not the way these people think. They do not have the thought process that you do or that I do. And
Right.
so when somebody out there is like, "I don't get it," it's like, well, of course you don't.
Right.
You're not
You're
going
the
to.
evil.
Not exactly. So the thought process on this other end, it's like, it's totally capitalized on, and we are a victim in
Yeah.
that situation completely, because we are banking on them thinking the way we do, and they
Yeah.
don't. They
That's a
do
big
not think that way.
realization that I've had over the last year
Mhm.
through this whole pandemic thing, is that, why would these people want to do that? People like Bill Gates, people like, but what I came to realize is they actually don't identify as the same species as us.
Mm-mm.
Like they don't.
Nope.
They think that they are above us and that
Mhm.
they are, more entitled. They're more intellectual. They have this higher identification of
Mhm.
humanity,
Mhm.
and we are beneath that. So
Mhm.
that's how they decide
Yeah.
that they have all the good ideas and that they need to execute their plan
Yes.
because they don't see themselves as one of us.
No, and we're a controlled species. And so going back to that example I was giving, they know that I am gonna be more willing to make that trade than they are. I mean, they just it's kind of like this buildup, and that's another thing they use for conditioning. It's like, I'm gonna give you a promise, so now your guard's down a little bit
Mhm.
because you're hoping on. So it's an entire manipulation system. And so, hey, we're gonna give you a vaccine. So here comes the
I'm
hopes up.
helping you.
I'm
Yeah.
helping you. Hey, guess
Yeah.
what? If
It's
you
all for
if you
good.
tell me your sins, you're that much closer to God. If whatever, like, find a system and really break it down and see what their promises are and how you're feeding into it. And then if you can step back and go, wow, look at me. I am really banking on that exchange again.
Right.
And are they thinking like I do? Am I putting my morality, my goodness, am I overlaying that? Am I projecting that onto this situation in hopes that that exchange is actually going to transpire the way I want it to transpire?
Right.
And in the moment, you might not have the answer for that, but just to even put yourself in that spot is taking yourself kind of out of their playbook, right? So now you can actually, and this is what something I wanted to kind of get back to, now you're not looking for, you don't have the savior mentality that has been so groomed.
Right.
You're going to step back and you're going to mindfully consider what is going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And you can say, bad guy example,
Mm-hmm.
that's not how this is going to go. We're not doing an exchange. And you have got to have some internal grit to
Mm-hmm.
be able to make that statement, because what they can do is then take that gun and put it to the victim's head and say, well, then you've just killed this person. And if you can be in that calm, you can go, have I? Now, if you've shifted it, there's a number of different ways this scenario can go down, because now you're stepping out of the script and they're kind of like, oh, wait. I don't know if we have, line, please, kind of
Yeah. We
idea.
don't have a plan for
We
that.
don't have a plan for that. So then if we as people, and I've been listening to a couple of your podcasts and some other ones too, and there's a question that'll come around. It's like, well, if the masses would just get together and
Yeah.
ignore what's going on, or just say no, or gather, or start creating their own, independent system or whatever, that threatens the whole structure of
That's right.
the few governing the many, right?
Yeah.
But what happens is the many are still looking, they don't get it, they don't understand that it's not just saying no, they've got to come in here
Mm-hmm.
and they have to say, hey, sovereignty, I probably ought to figure out the definition of what that means. Responsibility is going to be coming through.
Yep.
Convenience is probably going to be a lot different
Huge.
than what
Yeah.
I was experiencing.
Yep.
And really just getting the fact that the playbook is what I'm stepping out of. This is their playing field. They have written the playbook, and I am somehow going to try and appeal to them doing something for me that is going to be supportive of me in a way that I want to be supportive. That's not in their playbook.
Nope.
Yeah, so it's not going to happen. It has to be a completely different mindset. And if what is driving you in these repressed memories, in these deep darks of you, if you've got something that is fearfully driving you, you are making choices and making decisions from something that you don't even know. And that's, again, I'm just like, well, it's worth it to dig in and to actually start asking yourself
Right.
what these repressed traumas or these deep fears are. And it doesn't have to be satanic ritual
Right.
abuse, but it's still driving your decisions. You have got a
Right.
6-year-old in there that got bit by a dog sometime, and it was so scary that from here on out, you have just decided that, every dog owner is your enemy or whatever. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? It's just, it can go
Oh my
any
goodness.
direction.
It doesn't, it can be as simple as, somebody who's been humiliated for speaking out
Oh
and
my gosh.
expressing their opinion and then
Hmm.
been humiliated at a young age. And so that developed into your personality where you
Hmm.
don't want to say what
Hmm.
you're really thinking.
Well,
I
it's
mean,
really
that's how
demonstrated.
simple this
Simple.
whole thing can be driven by
Yep.
fear.
Yeah.
Just
Oh,
fear.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. So where's
and
your
if
fear
you're
coming
acting in
from?
fear, you're
Huh?
not free.
No. That's a true statement. You say that one again. I mean, that's worth saying again, right?
Yeah,
In
if you're
fear.
acting in fear, you are not free, and
Mm.
one of the things I've realized over this last year is that some people don't want to be free.
No,
So
no, that
sad.
is true.
That is
That is true.
so incredibly sad to me because you're missing out on the magic of life.
Hmm.
You are missing out.
Yet, I would say that you can say that because you are where you are. I would be able to agree with you because I am where I am. But they who don't want to be free, and they who are very comfortable with the status quo and the system that can feed them and clothe them, and I'm going to get chipped because it's so, isn't it convenient to
Yes.
interface with
Mhm.
my phone and all.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know, scares. I've been there. I mean, the whole, experimentation. I'm like, oh
Uh-huh.
no. But that's my opinion, and that's where I am. So I know I'm in a minority, and I feel like I've gotten to a place where I'm not going to say that I'm not in judgment, because that still comes up. I mean, that's still kind of like, oh, I know what that. Ooh,
Yeah,
been there.
yeah. Mhm.
And yet, I, I remember I was told once that there was a study done. I can't name it, but there was a study done by the French a long time ago on, they were studying how in the world could Hitler convince an entire country
Yep.
to do this. And so all of these things came out of it. But the thing that stuck with me the very most was the fact that they gave a figure in this study. They gave a figure that 30% of the public are okay with stepping forward and using their own mind, being that wild card. 70% of the population wanted a leader, wanted to just
Person
turn over their sovereignty,
thinking.
wanted to,
Mhm,
exactly.
mhm.
And so I looked at those numbers, and I'm all, wow, wow, that's a big population that, as I know I'm going to be telling my story, I'm not going to be getting through to. In fact, my audience, I don't know that my audience are Mormons. It's certainly not mainstream Mormons. They're going to be vehemently offended by what I'm saying, because what I'm saying is, when you're taught that you are the chosen people of God, and in the Mormon Church, there's very clear teaching that, um, if you if your leaders would ever lead you astray, God will kill them, would remove them from the face of the earth, is the way the wording goes,
Mhm.
before he would allow you to be led astray. I mean, there's a hall pass, right?
Right.
So if you teach that to your population enough, man, can you get cozy in that? You
Yeah.
can just kind of get nice and comfortable and be as patronizing as you
Mhm.
want to every other religion or anybody that doesn't agree with you, and say, well, one day you'll understand. And
Right.
and I can say that because I was that person. I could look at other religions and go, well, one day they'll have the truth.
Right.
And the irony was, in that time, I was still being accessed by the cult. I was still being accessed by this dark, underbelly
Right.
of the church, and I didn't want to think that it could be anything but, right.
Right.
Like, so my consciousness was like, oh, we're all on that parade,
Right. Well, how
you
much
know.
easier and then that's one thing I want to get through today too is like, think about this. How much easier is it to just go with the flow?
Oh.
Like, people don't want to
Hmm.
choose this
Hmm.
life for themselves when they've been
Yeah.
tortured like this. This is not
Yeah.
their choice,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. What I have found, when somebody, and speaking specifically to the Mormon church, the LDS religion, for those that are comfortable there, it's an easy, cozy place to stay for a number of reasons. When you become disenchanted with it, like my experience was, oh, well, see, I actually, now I'm really going through my therapy, and I'm like, oh, hell no. Um, I'm going to remove my name from the records of the church. I'm just going to extract myself fully. I cannot put energy into this anymore. And that was a process in and of itself. And oh my gosh, it was like a peeling away of my identity too. Like,
Yeah.
that was a whole
Yeah.
process that I could go into. But when people have that faith crisis and they get disenchanted, it's like they take the same energy, because they're still not really sure what's going on. They just know they don't agree with the teachings or the authorities, or for whatever reasons. And it could be huge. I mean, when the church came out with their whole campaign, very vocal campaign against the LGBTQ community, thousands of people removed their name from the church. They're just like, you have just crossed a line that I can no longer agree with. And so, there's big issues, but because the majority of what I've observed, this is my observations, they take that animosity, and they take that same energy, and they move it to this extreme. So now we've got two polars, right?
Mhm.
So now they're just kind of collecting with each other, and they're in their anger, and they're just church bashing, or they're just frustrated as hell about stuff. And it's the same energy. as when they were true believers. They're just on this betrayal anger side.
Yeah.
And they get very comfortable in feeling justified in that anger space. The real space, the real trial was for those of us that are like, I don't identify with the anger because that's
I don't
just as
wanna be
bad as
angry. Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
I
knew
think we
what I
see that with
knew.
Scientology, right? People who
Oh
are
my
in
gosh, Scientology,
Scientology
exactly. There's just this, and you
just
have to go through it. I am not
yeah,
saying don't go through it. And you
yeah.
sit in the space that you're going to sit until it no longer works for you.
Mhm.
But then when it doesn't work for you, you still feel isolated. There's still not necessarily a community, and you have to really kind of get more communal with yourself, right?
Right.
And
Again,
find
back
that.
turning inward,
Hmm.
right? I mean,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
the answer. This is the answer. It's, you know, you to turn inward and to not be reaching for outward fixes
Hmm.
all the time.
Hmm.
That's the way.
Absolutely.
Right? That's the way,
Absolutely.
and a lot of people, you know, especially, you know, if they're into religion or whatever, they're gonna have trouble with thinking like, "Oh, well, I can't listen to my own voice," but I just have never been one that can identify with that. I don't know why. Why
That's
does
so
God
funny.
have children if he's not
Yeah.
gonna talk to you through your own heart?
Isn't that really cool? So that again is the conditioning, like for me, and I'm speaking just for me.
Mhm.
I was not taught that. I was taught that there is a hierarchy that you go through,
Right.
thank God. So God doesn't, I mean, God will talk to you, and God will talk to you about, your own personal thing,
Mhm.
but there's a limit. Like you have a limit that you actually are allowed as far as that conversation goes. And then there are certain levels that you just have to, well, I got to take this to the authority. So my dad, since he's the patriarch of the home, and if that isn't the appropriate one, then you're going to go to a church leader. You're going to go to a bishop or stake president, or you're going to go up to, you can write letters to the guys at the top and whatever. But,
People
you
have
know,
probably don't even know you. It just seems like, you know,
no,
but
no,
but
that's a
you're
true statement.
yeah.
Yeah. So, but the thing is this, there's a trust. Like you have this assumption that since we're all God's children and God's looking down on this, it's like, oh, this poor Asia, she's got this issue.
Mhm.
And obviously, well, there is a hierarchy, there is structure, there is, order. And so I will talk to her through, you know, her husband, through whatever. And it gets reinforced in the church, so that's the way
Yeah,
it's, and that creates again porous boundaries. So
right,
I don't have, as a victim, I don't have a lot of boundaries. I am going
right,
to give you too much information. I am going to
right.
produce all kinds of reporting. And then if I'm conditioned to do it, I used to be honest, I used to have a photographic memory. I wished I had it still. I mean, one of the downsides of the healing, I guess, I don't know. But I did. I would be I was a magnificent reporter. I had a personality that could verbatim repeat conversations I had had weeks earlier, and maybe even months earlier. And I could even describe the setting within, and something like that. I mean, that's like an MK Ultra situation right there. That kind of technology is, I was I could even do that in my wake. I could tell my dad stuff about, I was just like, I could tell friends. It
Mm,
was just I had a thing for numbers too. Like there was something going on with numbers that I just knew how to memorize certain things. And so that was part of my conditioning too.
mm,
Um, but anyway, not that I don't utilize it now. It's just not that important. I don't have to be a reporter. I'm so invested in my own homeostasis,
right,
and this journey has been,
right.
it's been a consistent journey. I mean, it was 9 years of remembering, and then choosing a divorce, and then it's been 9 years of survival. Because part of the conditioning also in the organization I grew up is, when you're married, you're going to get married, you're going to have the husband and wife. It's not important now. Back when I was growing up, okay, so this is, I'm 55, but it's not important for me to get a degree. I don't need to have a profession. I am to be at home, and I got to be a stay at home mom, and
Mhm.
I was so grateful for that. Not because I didn't have to work, but because raising 6 children
Oh
was
my
hard.
gosh. Yeah.
And to be honest,
I
I
have
gotta tell
2.
you,
That's
yeah,
that's about a lot.
I I love my kids, and I didn't think I wanted to be Joan London. Please remember this. I was
Yeah,
all about going back to New York City and jumping into CBS as soon as I could.
right.
But that was not that wasn't something. I mean, the prophet at the time came out, it was Ezra Taft Benson, and he was just like, "Nope, women's place is in the home." And when I was being proposed to by my husband, I kind of mentioned this thing about really wanting to have a career, and he's like, "Are you going to go against the prophet? No, you need to be home." And I'm like, "Oh, I guess you're right," And
Yeah.
so that was, and I was agreeing to it. I'm not saying that it
Yeah.
was I was
Well,
just
that's
like,
what you thought
"Oh,
was
yeah,
best. Yeah.
exactly." And it turned out, I mean, my kids are contributing members of society. I have,
Right.
amazing children. Um, yeah, they're all adults now. But holy cow, I like those people. Like, I
That's
would choose them as friends,
yeah.
you know? They are
Yeah.
they so
That's
I
a
would
great
say
thing to be
there's
able to
part of
say about
this.
your own kids, and I'm
Oh,
grateful to be able to
100%.
say that about mine too.
Isn't that it is,
Yeah,
it's really
I
cool.
enjoy their company. I don't wanna go on trips without them and stuff
I
because
know, I know. I know they
fun.
truly are like a support base for me, and they are my favorite people. But because that was my training, because that was just the conditioning that was there, when I got divorced, and I can cite hundreds of other women that I know that got divorced, and they're like, "I don't have a skill." I was lucky enough to have a degree. I had a communications
Right.
degree, but I had been out of the workforce for 25 years. That's
That's
did not
scary.
so I went
Yeah.
and I got a $12 an hour job at a grocery store, right? I was just like, "Well, this works," I was oh, anyway, and it was where I was. I am not shaming myself. I can just look at myself at that time and just kind of celebrate the fact that I felt like $12 an hour at a grocery store is pretty awesome, right? I
Right.
wasn't I mean, I was just recovering from so many things. Anyway,
Right.
and so, yeah, I mean, that is something that some women look at and go, "I can't get divorced. I He
Right.
makes all the money and I would lose all of this." And that was one of the things my husband
Kept
said to
over
me
you.
before it.
Yeah.
He was just like, "How can you leave all this?" And there was a lot to leave. Believe me,
Yeah.
there was a lot to leave. And I'm like, "What about this right here? Like, how can I leave all this?" But there was none of this. It was all of this, because the church is very good at um grooming the attitude that appearances, I mean, this what ends up happening is appearances, but they're grooming the attitude that he who God loves the most blesses the most, so then they who have the most and look the best are the ones God loves the most. And
Optics.
I'm really like condensing that. People, and there's going to be pushback on this, but there's this underlying attitude that if God loves you, He's going to bless you, and if you're not living in accordance to the principles that God has laid forward through His authorities, naturally you're going to be punished, or naturally you have created a horrible life that Satan can come in and influence. And naturally, all of this stuff that normally, that's part of a really broken system of women that get divorced and can't really provide for themselves. It's not because I'm
Right.
a bad person and I'm not in the church anymore. It's because there is a great big hole there,
Right.
and I don't qualify for things. But if I do qualify for things, then I'm kept in that system, and oh, it's a nightmare. And
Yeah.
there's people that can attest to that too. So
Yeah.
it's still a pushback, and this church is like, it does follow some of the definitions of a cult, a lot of the definitions of a cult.
I see that. It's
Yeah.
interesting, just
Yeah.
I've been reading about cults lately and stuff over the last few months just because I see so many of these kind of tools. I don't know how to,
Tool.
cult
Perfect.
tools that
Hmm.
are being used in our culture now to control what people do. And
Hmm.
and there's no wiggle room. We've
Mm.
never seen such divisiveness with our politics and whatnot. And it's cancel
Yeah.
culture. It's, get
Ah,
away. I've read people publicly announce that, they didn't give their family member a certain burial process because, they supported Trump. Can you imagine? Like,
no,
this we've
honestly.
never really been here before, but that right there is cult behavior.
Mhm.
To think that you need to go that far
Mhm.
to show your loyalty to one side or the other, like that's cult behavior.
Yeah. It's the idealization of a personality, and that is really
Yeah.
the way this particular religion began. It was of a personality, and
Yeah, that's so interesting.
that idealization of where it began, and then subsequently every single leader since then.
Yeah.
And in the church there's the authorities, and so they set it up like the church was described in the Bible. So there's 12 apostles, and then the Mormon church has the prophet and his two counselors, or the president and two counselors. So there's actually 15 of them. And there's a lot of idealization that goes around that. They will say, no, we worship Jesus Christ. And yeah, that's part of it. But when you really get into kind of the culture of the Mormons, I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've heard people say, well, who's your favorite apostle? Who's your favorite guy? And it's
Right.
like,
Right.
so that it still follows
Yeah.
along the
We
psychology of
we have a
idealization of
tendency
the
in this country,
personality.
and I've said this for a couple of years to like my husband and people I know, is
Hmm.
that and we do it through the school system, is we create heroes
Hmm.
and we never talk about the bad things that they've done. And
Hmm.
we're all human. And we
Hmm.
always we say these things like, oh, nobody's perfect, and
Hmm.
we act like we believe that, but yet we idolize these
Hmm.
people and put them up on a pedestal like they've never done anything wrong
Hmm.
ever.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then we're mad when we find out they did. And then we
if
have to
if
if
we
they find
accept
out.
it,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, if they
or we
find
just
out, or if you want
deny
to
it.
accept it, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm going to come out and I'm going to say, look, here's the thing: church is involved with the most debase, Jeffrey Epstein-esque thing, that the amount of money that the church actually
yeah.
has is obscene.
Mhm.
And people are looking at going, well, it's because we pay tithing. And I am like, okay, so hold the
Yeah.
phone. Really. One
These
investment
buildings
account,
are massive.
one investment account it was like in 2019. Yeah, 2019. One investment account, $100 billion. Just one investment account. That's it. One. $100 billion. Like, if they had a chart, and I saw this chart, that investment account for the church was just the next level under the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Like, my mind is blown, and that's not tithing. And they're like, well, we're good investors and we're saving for, and it's like,
Right, right,
no,
right, right, right.
no. As a matter of fact, I've seen some other things, and I am not. There's more here.
Yeah.
And then again, people are going to come back and they're going to say, well, prove it. And the social shaming that is groomed and supported, that we get to see with COVID, and
Yeah.
mask or don't mask,
Yeah.
and gather or don't gather, or whatever it is. People really feel entitled, especially in this religion, to be in your business and tell you what you should do, and let you know your own
Right.
labels. You don't have a mask on, well, you're a murderer. It's like,
Right.
wow, that's a big jump. But that fear is
Jesus,
so true.
sure
I mean,
is.
I actually read that on a Facebook
I know,
post.
I've seen stuff like that too. It's insane.
It's
And I've also seen now
so
since the
prolific.
vaccine, well, I got the vaccine and I'm totally fine. So just shut up and take your vaccine.
Mhm, mhm. Make me safe. But see,
Yeah.
this is also fostered, and wow, this is fostered in another really good example that I like to illustrate with, is like, there's a lot of us that have had this experience on one side or the other. In the grocery store, you're the parent, you've got your child, doesn't matter the age, but typically, the tantrum throwing age. So we'll just say 3-year-old, right?
3. Yeah.
Right. So child starts having a meltdown. All right. The first thought typically that happens here with the parent is, oh my gosh, stop, because all of a sudden all of this, people turn.
Oh, yeah.
So there is this social pressure to do
Quiet.
something about the thing that is going on in front of you. And I have seen fewer examples of parents actually I've seen it, but not very often, parents having the calmness and the wherewithal to actually focus in on the child and work with what was going on right there, whether they have to remove them and go outside, leave their
Mhm.
basket, I don't know. But there was more of the, how do I stop this? And so what that reflects is the grooming that we have as people to, you are making me uncomfortable, so you stop. Your
Right.
child is making me
Yeah.
uncomfortable, so you need to shut that child up because I'm
Yeah.
uncomfortable, versus I'm uncomfortable, I probably ought to remove myself. So here we go, vaccines or COVID or the whatevers. You're scaring me because you don't have a mask on, so you need to change for me. You are
Right.
putting me and other people at
Yeah.
risk versus I'm uncomfortable here. And how are my energetics drawing this to me? But people don't want to go there. And I'm not trying to really do anything other than draw attention to the fact that the grooming of projection and the grooming of making other people change their behavior because you're uncomfortable is ludicrous.
Yeah.
That's what we're trained to do. I don't like what's going on, so you got to stop. I don't like what's going on here,
Yeah.
so you got to. You're the one in therapy, Asia. So you're the problem in this marriage. So you need change. And it's like, there's two here.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Asia,
maybe we
where
want to
can
look at
people
that.
connect with you? I want to make sure we give everyone the
So
opportunity. This has been a phenomenal
it's,
conversation.
thank
Thank
you,
you
thank
so
you so
much
much.
for
Do you know
for
what?
doing this.
I appreciate having the time, and it's been delightful, to be honest. The best way to get a hold of me right now, you're just catching me right at the beginning of a launch, and so what I'm doing is I am interviewing victims and advocates that have been impacted by cult and ritual abuse, and I want to have a number of interviews ready for when I launch the podcast, and I'm getting close to that. So the website is up. It's letterstothepeople.com.
Letterstothepeople.com.
Right. And the reason I chose that, it kind of came in during meditation at one point, but it's basically stories. And they can be served in the form of a letter because I recognized how powerful it was for me to journal my stories to myself and writing that down. It was a huge, it's also a lost form. I'm not texting it to myself, right?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
writing this down. So letterstothepeople.com is the website. That's where the podcast is going to be launched. I am going to be on other podcast platforms.
Yeah.
I do have a Patreon, Letters to the People. If people want to contact me, they can email me at info.letterstothepeople at protonmail.com. Proton Mail is an encrypted mailing system, so I'm choosing that one.
Yep.
I will have, I've got a BitChute set up. I have a Twitch account. I also have a Patreon, as I said. And I'll have an Instagram and a Telegram set up also. So I am going to actually have ways that people can get a hold of me. But, like I said, I'm just moving into this. But the website is set up. There's a
Perfect.
PO box also on my website. You can go to the contact page and you can send a letter if you want to start sending letters. If you're a victim and you want to write about your experience and have it witnessed. Sometimes it's nice just to write it down and send it and just
Yeah.
know it went somewhere safe. You can put on the outside of the envelope, don't read. I just wanted to know it was going to go somewhere, and I'll actually do a burning ceremony over it for you, or something like that. So that's safe. But if you do want it witnessed, I've had some different conversations with maybe working with some groups that would be volunteers to read these letters. Haven't thought about how they could actually be published to the public yet. I'm just trying to make sure that we've got some things in line for safety measures
Yeah.
because I'm telling you, when you've got this kind of stuff, there are there's sabotaging techniques that have been programmed in here and that are also outside of you that are looking to keep you contained.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be really mindful of how to approach this, and it's going to be a little bit of a process. It's going to be fairly gradual, very mindful, and we're going to learn as we go. And I know my experience. I know I can hold space. I know that I'm a very strong individual, and I'm very ready to speak about this. I know
Yeah.
there's going to be pushback, and I know there's going to be relief.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's time for it. So I'm just really grateful that you extended the invitation and that we were able to spend some time together
Yeah.
today to do this. So thank you.
Well, I think you couldn't have nailed it better when you say that it's time
Mhm.
because there's so many people that have been impacted by this issue and
Mhm.
it's going to be painful. I'm not
Mhm.
going to, it's
Oh,
going to be very
messy and
painful for
painful.
people to
Mhm.
discover that what they thought their reality was maybe isn't. And
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, but it is
Yeah.
time. It is time.
It
There's
is.
been enough over the last few years specifically, there's been enough revealed
Mhm.
to show us where
Yeah.
we need to be looking right now.
Yeah. Religion is going to come around. People, they're going to have their devastation with the government, the healthcare systems, the banking systems. Religion is not, it's not exempt. I mean, it
Yep.
actually drives a lot of this. This is kind of where it began, actually,
Mhm.
is with religion. And so,
I believe that.
depending on how ingrained you are with your belief system and your relationship with God, this is going to dismantle a lot of what you were hoping was the truth. And so, if you can, as you mentioned, if you can just get still with it and actually pull up a stillness where you can just allow that question to be,
Mhm.
right? Is this possible?
Mhm.
And see how you viscerally react to that instead of just pushing it away automatically. Just sit with that. You will do more for yourself. It will be better for yourself in just kind of being in that stillness to allow for that to be a possibility that this, religion is corrupt more so than you think, and what you hope they were, it has been completely revamped into something that you would never choose to be a part of or give your money to at
Right.
all or
Right.
support. So yeah, it's going to be difficult and it's going to be messy, and honestly, it is so doable. I'm such a champion. I'm a courage advocate, to be honest. So yeah,
Yeah. And thank you for
here for
that.
that.
Thank you. And I'm so
Thanks.
excited to start listening to your podcasts as they come
Thank
out.
you.
I'm
Yeah,
I'm really excited to hear these stories and
yeah,
just be the ears to
yeah.
validate these stories that
Thank you.
should, have permission to come out worldwide.
Thank you. Yeah, Letters to the People. That's the name of the podcast. So I appreciate you a lot, though. Thank you so much,
Thank
Tammy.
you, Asia. If the naturally inspired movement makes sense to you, let's do this together and transform the medical model and help people take charge of their health. Learn more about how you can join the Naturally Inspired movement by going to naturallyinspiredadvocate.com or call me at 970-475-4862.